Welcome back to ALECTV. I'm Tom McLaughlin, coming to you from the 46th ALEC Annual Meeting in Austin, Texas, and I'm here with James Broughel from the Mercatus Center. How you doing?
I'm great. Good to be with you.
Glad to hear it. I'm glad to be here too. So you work a lot with regulatory policy, right?
That's right.
Very cool, and mostly with overregulation in the states.
I guess you could say that, yeah.
Something like that? Okay. Cool. So can you tell me a little bit more about exactly what it is that you're working on and
Sure.
how that relates to state policy?
Sure. So for the last couple of years, I've been involved in an effort to try to quantify how much regulation there is across the 50 states. So we're just trying to measure how much regulation there is.
Oh, wow.
Because in many cases, governors and state legislators actually really don't have any idea how much regulation they have in the books and how they compare to their neighbors. So we've been using text analysis technology to analyze state administrative codes and the federal code as well. So most codes are just too long to read through from start to finish. They would take weeks or even months to read if you just spent 40 hours a week reading regulations. So we use computer programs. We have a few different metrics we look at. At the simplest level, we just count up the number of words in the code. We can count the number of restrictive terms like shall, must, may not, required, words that could signify requirements of various kinds. And we look for which industries are mentioned the most in the code to figure out which industries are being the most regulated. So
what do you find normally in that kind of thing? What industries are the ones being regulated?
Well, we've found that the average state has about 136,000 of these restrictive terms in its administrative code. And keep in mind, that's just in the administrative regulations. There's also statutory law that legislatures write. There's policy documents. There's other kinds of ways the government can impose mandates. There's actually large variation across states. So Alaska is the least regulated state that we've looked at so far, with about 52,000 of these restrictive terms. California has almost 400,000.
Oh my God.
In terms of the kinds of regulation, very often health and environmental regulation tend to be the dominant forms at the state level. Often the health department or the state environmental quality agency will just blow all the other agencies away in terms of the amount of regulations they issue. Occupational regulation can also be a big area.
Right.
So these are like occupational licenses, all the various boards that regulate particular professions. So
yeah, it makes sense. So I'm from a state that I like to think it's pretty heavily overregulated. I'm from New Jersey. What does your data say about that?
So we actually haven't been able to analyze the New Jersey Administrative Code. It's one of a handful of states that we can't look at, and the reason is New Jersey and Vermont is another state like this. They've handed over the rights to their code to a private company, LexisNexis.
That's not common,
now,
is it?
Well, there are only two states where the only way that we can look at the code is through a private company. Sometimes LexisNexis will have a version of the code that it also issues, but usually there's a government website you can also go to. So anyone can read the New Jersey Administrative Code on LexisNexis. It's freely available to read, but we're actually prohibited from using our web scrapers to analyze it with this text analysis technology due to the terms and conditions that LexisNexis has.
Right.
So unfortunately, we haven't been able to look at New Jersey's code, and LexisNexis doesn't return our phone calls.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what that says about it. But what about the other two states? What's the issue there?
So Arkansas, we learned, doesn't even have an administrative code. They have regulations that they write, but no one has ever bothered to compile them in a single place. Now, just this last year, they've addressed this issue. They passed a law to create an administrative code, but it doesn't yet exist. So that's it. Hawaii is the other state where basically their online code is such a mess, it would be impossible to write a program to analyze it.
Huh, go figure. So if I wanted to go look for this data, right, and go check it out, where can I go?
You can go to quantgov.org, Quantgov. We have a number of different data sets there. We have something called reg data, which looks at the federal regulatory code, state reg data, which looks at all the state administrative codes, and a few other different projects. But all the data is available online there.
Oh, that's really neat. Hey, James, if you had a message to legislators that work in this space, and you want to bring the people to this meeting, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say ALEC has done some good things to promote regulatory reform in the last few years. There was a piece of model legislation called an act to put a cap on government red tape, which was informed by some research that the Mercatus Center has done, and also some efforts that most British Columbia, Canada, actually were engaged in. So they had a major regulatory reform in the early 2000s, cut their regulatory code in half, and that the process that they followed is actually a pretty simple step-by-step process. We could talk about it if you want, but that's all laid out in that ALEC model legislation. And so I would tell them to think about regulatory reform and maybe take a look at what some other states are doing in other countries like Canada.
Very cool. I think that's about all the time we have for today, though. But I'd love to talk to you more about that. But yeah, if you guys want to keep it right here, we're going to have much more from ALECTV. James, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.